Ms. Hooper, you may step down.
The Commonwealth would call Krista Lundgren, please.
Raise your right hand for me, please. Do solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give in the cause now in hearing shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Thank you. You may be seated.
Good morning.
May I proceed, Your Honor?
Yes, you may.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Could you please introduce yourself to the members of the jury, telling them your name and then also spelling it for the record?
Yes, my name is Krista Lundgren, Krista Lundgren.
What is your current occupation?
I'm a forensic scientist too at the Massachusetts State Police Crime Lab in the DNA unit.
How long have you been employed by the Massachusetts State Police Crime Laboratory?
I've been there for 10 years and 4 months.
And how long have you been a forensic scientist too?
I have been a forensic scientist too for about 9 years.
What does it mean to be a forensic scientist too?
It means that I complete DNA testing on items of evidence as well as known reference standards. I write reports detailing those results, and I can testify to them if needed.
What is the nature of the work that you do at the Massachusetts State Police Crime Lab?
So we complete DNA testing on items of evidence. We do comparisons between those profiles and known profiles obtained from an individual. We calculate statistics and write reports detailing those results.
Prior to your employment within the Massachusetts State Police Crime Lab, did you have additional employment in the field?
I did.
And where was that?
I worked at Sorensen Forensics, which is a private forensic laboratory in Salt Lake City, Utah, and I was there as a DNA analyst for 2 years.
Could you describe to the members of the jury your educational background, please?
I have a bachelor's of science in forensic science and a bachelor's of science in biotechnology, and that's from the University of New Haven. And I have a professional science master's degree in applied genomics, and that's from the University of Connecticut.
Do you have additional experience in the area of forensic biology?
I do. So besides working at Sorensen and the Massachusetts State Police Crime Lab, I completed 2 internships. During undergraduate studies, I interned at the New York City Office of the Chief Medical Examiner and their Department of Forensic Biology. And I also participated in an internship during graduate school at the Connecticut Division of Scientific Services and their DNA unit.
And this may be obvious, but could you describe what is forensic biology?
Forensic biology is the application of science to testing items of evidence and doing DNA testing.
Have you received any specialized training in addition to what you've already described as it relates to forensic biology?
Yes, so before beginning casework at both Sorensen as well as the State Police Crime Lab, we're required to participate in a training program. This involves learning and demonstrating laboratory techniques as well as data interpretation training, and you have to take and pass competency tests and quizzes before you can begin actually working on casework. And I did that at both locations.
Approximately how many cases would you say you've had the opportunity to perform DNA analysis on at the Massachusetts State Lab?
About 1,600 at the State Lab and about 1,000 at Sorensen.
Are you familiar with the term proficiency testing?
Yes, I am.
What is proficiency testing?
A proficiency test evaluates an analyst's ability to perform DNA testing. We're required to take and pass one test every 6 months in order to remain proficient and to be able to continue doing casework. The proficiency test is submitted to our lab like any other case, and we treat it like all casework, but we send the results back to that company who then grades it. And again, we have to take and pass one every 6 months.
And approximately how many proficiency tests have you participated in?
I've taken and passed 4 at Sorensen and 19 at the State Police Crime Lab.
How many times have you testified regarding DNA analysis that you've done during your time with the Massachusetts State Lab?
Over 50.
And what about with Sorensen Forensics?
About 10 times with them.
Is the Massachusetts State Police Crime Laboratory accredited?
We are.
What does that mean?
It means that we've received formal recognition from an external source that we meet or exceed the quality assurance guidelines that are set forth by the FBI, as well as we're meeting the ISO 17025 standards for forensic testing.
And where do those standards come from?
They're generated by the accreditation body, which is ANAB at our laboratory, and we need to follow those in order to remain accredited.
And that's a neutral body that evaluates what the state police lab is doing to making sure that what they're doing is accurate and reliable?
Correct.
What type of quality assurance methods does the Massachusetts State Police Lab take to ensure reliable results in its testing?
There are many that we take, but one of the major ones is we have standard operating procedures that we call SOPs. These are similar to a recipe where it tells us how much chemicals to use, how long to use instrumentation for, so that regardless of who is doing that step in the lab, it's being done the same way every time. We also include positive and negative controls throughout our testing. So the positive control will show if the reaction worked properly, and the negative control will show if there's been any contamination introduced throughout that step. And we also make sure that all of our chemicals that we use on casework are tested first to make sure that they're working properly and contamination free before we then go and put them into a case.
And you may have mentioned some of this already, but does the Massachusetts State Police Lab follow standardized protocols and procedures with its testing?
We do.
And is that in conjunction with some of the stuff that you were just testifying to?
Yes.
Does your work undergo any type of review process?
It does. There's a two-step review process at our laboratory that involves a technical and an administrative review.
You had mentioned that these protocols and procedures and assurance methods that are done at the lab are steps to prevent any type of contamination. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Are you familiar with an elimination database?
We are.
And what is
I am.
that? Or you are. What is that?
So that's an in-house database that we have filled with DNA profiles from employees that work throughout the laboratory. And so anytime we obtain a DNA profile from an item of evidence, we search it against that database to ensure that it doesn't hit to any employee or show any signs that there was a contamination event during the processing.
In addition to that, in terms of ensuring the reliability of your results, are there quality assurance measures that you yourself take in terms of the DNA testing that you're doing and the samples that are done within the lab?
Yes, so there are many steps, and the first is to make sure that our processing area is very clean and sprayed down with bleach. We also put down a layer of bench paper, and we are wearing protective equipment such as a hairnet, a face mask, gloves, and a lab coat to ensure that our DNA does not get into the testing that we're doing.
Now I want to specifically talk to you about the reason you're here. What is DNA?
DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid, and it is the genetic blueprint for life. You inherit half your DNA from your mother and half from your father. And during DNA testing, we look at specific regions throughout the DNA. And within those regions, each person has a unique number of repeated segments. So it's the number of repeated segments that are unique to a person with the exception of an identical twin, and what we look for during DNA testing.
What kinds of biological materials contain DNA?
It can be found in biological fluids like blood, semen, saliva, and it can also be found in skin cells.
And is it fair to say that whether it's blood, semen, saliva, or skin cells, the DNA profile for an individual will be the same in any of those locations?
Yes.
Is DNA different between humans?
Yes, with the exception of an identical twin.
What is a DNA profile?
It is the number of repeated segments that a person has at each of the locations that we test, and those all combine to create a DNA profile.
And is it fair to say that when you're looking at a DNA profile, you're looking at unique regions within the DNA profile, correct?
Yes.
Are there certain steps that are involved in obtaining a DNA profile?
Yes, there are.
And is it a 4-step process?
So there's 4 steps in the lab, and then there's 2 steps beyond that.
Could you take us through those steps?
Sure. So the first step is sample preparation, and this is when an analyst will take custody of a sampling of evidence that's been taken by someone from the criminalistics unit. We will take custody of that sample and identify the unique case number and item number that has been given, and also document what that looks like when we receive it. And then we move into the laboratory steps, which the first is extraction. And during this step, we apply heat and chemicals to that sampling of the evidence. And that will cause any cells that might be on that sample of evidence to come off and break open and to release the DNA we want to test into the liquid. We can then separate all unwanted cellular material from the DNA so that all that's left at the end of extraction is just the DNA we want to analyze. We then quantify it to find how much DNA is there, and we need to know how much for the next step, which is amplification, where we make millions of copies of those specific regions throughout the DNA we want to analyze. And we need the millions of copies for the next step, which is detection, where we detect the DNA profile that was on the item of evidence. And the very last step is interpretation, where an analyst like myself will interpret that DNA profile that we got off of the item of evidence and determine how many people donated DNA to the sample and if it's suitable to be compared to a sample from an individual. And if it is, we'll do that comparison and calculate statistics and then write a report.
So essentially, you break open the cells and you collect the DNA. Then you check to make sure that you have enough DNA to actually compare it to a potential profile, correct?
Yes, we make sure that there is enough DNA there to move forward to amplify it and that there's enough DNA profile at the end to be suitable to be compared.
And the amplification, the millions of copies that you described making, why are you making millions of copies at that amplification stage?
So we need enough information to be able to detect it in the following stage.
Is it fair to say these are really small things and you're copying them so that you're able to visualize them?
Correct.
And once they're analyzed, you said it moves on to the interpretation phase. Is that correct?
Yes,
Are you familiar with the term a question sample?
I am.
What is a question sample?
It comes from an item of evidence where the source of the DNA on that sample is unknown.
And are you familiar with a reference sample or a known sample?
Yes.
And what is that?
That is a sample taken directly from an individual where the source of the DNA is known. So an example would be blood drawn directly from your arm or a swab taken from the inside of your mouth.
And is it fair to say a known standard doesn't matter if it's blood from your arm or a swab from your mouth? The DNA is going to be the same no matter where it's taken from a person?
Correct.
In the lab, are the question samples processed in a different location than the known or reference samples?
Yes.
And why is that?
That is to ensure there's no contamination between the two.
And is it fair to say whoever's analyzing the reference samples doesn't have any, the question samples doesn't have any information relative to the known or reference samples until their testing is complete?
Correct.
I want to specifically, I don't know if it's a good time to break or if you want me to just keep going before I switch gears.
I think we can keep going a little bit because we've had one quick break and got.
Certainly. I want to specifically turn your attention to your testimony today. Does it relate to lab case number 22-24257?
It does.
And at some point were you assigned to analyze data from this case?
I was.
Specifically, could you describe to the jury what you were asked to do?
So there were 3 samples that were sent for DNA testing. The first was item 2-1.2.1, which was a sample of the handle and exterior cap of a bottle of deicer. The second item was sample 2-2.2.1, which was a swabbing of the exterior of a Powerade bottle. And the final sample was item 2-2.3.1, which was a swabbing of the mouth and interior cap of the Powerade bottle. And all 3 of those were recovered from 108 Central Avenue.
And specifically, those 3 items was the process that you described in terms of generating a potential DNA profile done as it related to each of those 3 items that you just described.
Yes.
Was testing also done at the lab on reference samples?
Yes.
And specifically, were there 3 reference samples that were provided to your lab where known DNA profiles were generated for future comparison with any DNA profile that may be able to be generated from the 3 items that you just described?
Yes.
And specifically, was one of them related to item 5-1.01.1.1, a known blood standard of Leroy Fowler?
It was.
And was one of them item 7-1.1, a known DNA swab of Judy Church?
It was.
And was one of those items item 8-1.1, a known blood swab, saliva swab of Barbara Randall?
It was.
And that's generated in another part of the lab, and it's essentially provided to you after your testing to compare whether any of those 3 individuals were consistent with the profile that you may have been able to generate, correct?
Yes.
I want to specifically talk to you about item 2-1.2.1, the sample of a handle and exterior cap of a bottle of deicer from 108 Central Avenue. Could you describe to the members of the jury what the results were as it related to your examination of that testing?
The DNA profile was a mixture not suitable for comparison due to the quality of the profile.
And we should have probably talked about this earlier, but what is a mixture?
A mixture is when there's DNA detected from more than one individual.
And on a unknown profile or a question sample, is a mixture common?
Yes.
And why is that?
Because it depends. There can often be a lot of DNA from different people on different objects.
And is it fair to say you don't know where these question samples are coming from or where they have been, so they're not the type of pristine profile that you might expect from swabbing someone's mouth or taking someone's blood?
Correct.
And in this case, you had indicated it was a mixture not suitable for comparison due to the quality of the profile. What does that mean?
That means that there is not enough information or enough DNA there to generate a profile that was suitable to compare to a reference standard.
As it related to item 2-2.2.2.1, the sample of the exterior of a Powerade bottle from 108 Central Avenue, was the same process that you described done as it related to that item?
Yes.
And were you able to determine if that was a single source profile, a mixture, either way?
Yes.
And what were you able to determine?
The DNA profile was interpreted as a mixture of 3 contributors, including male DNA.
And when you say a mixture of 3 contributors, how are you able to determine, based on your evaluation of the data that's generated through that 4-step process, that there's a mixture of 3 contributors?
It's based on looking at the DNA profile that's been obtained and seeing how much information we see, and it displayed and showed that it was from 3 individuals.
And that's based on the various locations that you're able to see in the DNA, that there's more DNA than you'd expect from 2 individuals, but it's consistent with 3.
Yes.
And what did you do as it related to that item from the exterior of the Powerade bottle once it was determined that there were 3 contributors, at least one of which was male?
Then that profile was compared to standards for Mr. Fowler, Miss Church, and Miss Randall.
And what were your results before I do that, how did you know there was male DNA present in that mixture?
There are certain parts of DNA that are specific to male, the Y chromosome being the location, and this profile indicated the presence of male in that Y chromosome.
And at some point you were able to compare the profile that was generated from the sample of the exterior of the Powerade bottle from 108 Central Avenue to the known reference profile from the blood of Leroy Fowler. Is that correct?
Correct.
And based on your training experience, what were your results as it related to that comparison?
The DNA profile from this item is at least 9.9 sextillion times more likely if it originated from Leroy Fowler and 2 unknown individuals than if it originated from 3 unknown, unrelated individuals. This provides support for an inclusion.
How big is a sextillion?
It is a 1 with 21 zeros after it.
And you found that inclusion for Mr. Fowler in the DNA profile from the exterior of the Powerade bottle was 9.9 sextillion in favor of inclusion?
Yes.
Excuse me. Did you have an opportunity to compare that same DNA profile that was generated from the exterior of the Powerade bottle to the known DNA profile of Judy Church?
I did.
And could you describe to the juries, based on your training and experience, what the results of that comparison was?
The DNA profile from this item is at least 36 septillion times more likely if it originated from Judy Church and 2 unknown individuals than if it originated from 3 unknown unrelated individuals, and this provides support for an inclusion.
How big is a septillion?
It is a 1 with 24 zeros after it.
So it's bigger than a sextillion?
Correct.
And did you also have an opportunity to compare that same DNA profile from the exterior of the Powerade bottle to the known DNA profile of Barbara Randall?
I did.
And based on your training and experience, could you describe to the jury what your results are when you did that comparison?
Barbara Randall is excluded from this DNA profile.
Did you also have an occasion, you had said that you had done a third DNA testing on item 2-2.3.1, which is the sample, the swabbing from the sample of the mouth and interior cap of the Powerade bottle from 108 Central Ave. Is that correct?
Correct.
And again, you followed the same procedure that you previously discussed was followed, and a DNA profile was able to be generated?
Yes.
When that profile was generated, was it also determined whether it was a single source profile or a mixture profile?
Yes, it was a mixture.
And for this profile, were you able to determine how many contributors you believed were a part of that mixture?
Yes, the DNA profile was interpreted as a mixture of 2 contributors, including male DNA.
So when you looked at the first item, I guess the first item as it related to the Powerade bottle, the exterior, you were able to look at that profile and you observed that there were 3 contributors on that exterior Powerade bottle, correct?
Yes.
But when you looked at the DNA from the swab of the interior mouth and cap area of the Powerade bottle, there's only 2 contributors. Is that correct?
Correct.
And were you able to compare was there also male DNA found in that profile as well?
There was.
And for the same reasons that you just described?
Yes.
Excuse me. Did you have an occasion to compare the DNA profile generated from the sample of the mouth and interior cap of the Powerade bottle from 108 Central Avenue to the known DNA profile of Leroy Fowler?
I did.
And based on your training and experience, what were your results as it related to that comparison?
The DNA profile is at least 23 septillion times more likely if it originated from Leroy Fowler and an unknown individual than if it originated from 2 unknown unrelated individuals, and this provides support for an inclusion.
And septillion, you said, was with 24 zeros?
Septillion, yes, 1 with 24.
And this was 23 septillion in favor of Mr. Fowler being included as a contributor in that mixture of 2 contributors from the interior mouth, the swab of the mouth and interior cap of the Powerade bottle?
Yes, that DNA profile is at least 23 septillion times more likely.
Did you have an occasion to compare that DNA profile to the known profile of Judy Church?
I did.
And could you just, based on your training and experience, what were the results of that comparison?
The DNA profile is at least 2.3 octillion times more likely if it originated from Judy Church and an unknown individual than if it originated from 2 unknown unrelated individuals, and this provides support for an inclusion.
And we haven't talked about octillion. How big is octillion?
A 1 with 27 zeros after it.
And did you also have an occasion to compare that profile to the known profile of Barbara Randall as well?
I did.
And what were the results based on your training and experience of that comparison?
Barbara Randall is excluded from that DNA profile.
What did you do with your results once you concluded your interpretation?
My interpretation, my report, and my entire case file went through that 2-step review process I spoke of. So it was technically and administratively reviewed. And once that was complete, then the report was issued.
And as part of the report that was issued, your findings that we just described specifically as it related to the 2 items where you were able to generate a profile for potential comparison, the sample of the exterior of the Powerade bottle and the sample of the mouth and interior. Did you generate a chart depicting those results?
I did not.
Did you put it in a graph form?
Oh, yes, it is. It is in a table.
Table, sorry.
Yes.
If I may approach, Your Honor. Sorry, you said table, right? I'm
Yes,
going to show you a table and ask if you recognize that table.
I do.
Is that the table that was generated depicting the results that we've been talking about as it related to your testing in this case?
Yes.
If this could be marked as the next exhibit, please.
Mr. Narconis,
No objection.
Exhibit 61.
Exhibit 21's not, 61.
With the court's permission, may I publish this as well?
Yes, you may.
I'm going to show you what's been marked as Exhibit 61. Let's see. Is it fair to say the item number is depicted on the far left?
It is.
And that's the item number we were talking about, and then the sample description?
Correct.
The third column, the DNA profile description, is that where you were able to document what you testify to in terms of how many contributors you were able to locate within the profile?
Yes.
So for 2-2.2.1, mixture of 3 contributors, and for item 2-2.3.1, a mixture of 2 contributors?
Correct.
And the fourth column, could you describe to the jury what's depicted in that column?
Those are the names of the individuals that were compared to those mixtures.
So fair to say for each of those items, you compared 3 reference comparisons to the DNA profile that you were able to generate from the question sample?
Yes.
And the hypothesis interpretation, this is what you testified to, that the hypothesis for this first item, the exterior of the Powerade sample, hypothesis 1, that Leroy Fowler is included as a contributor, that 9.9 sextillion in favor of the fact that he's included as a contributor.
Correct.
And the same hypothesis for, as it related to the reference comparison of Judy Church, at 36 septillion in favor of hypothesis 1, that Judy Church is included as a contributor into that profile.
Correct.
And that Barbara Randall, when compared as included as a contributor or not included as a contributor, she's excluded as a contributor altogether. Is that correct?
Correct.
And very briefly, as it related to that sample of the mouth and interior cap of the Powerade, again, you compared it to the same 3 reference individuals, correct?
Correct.
And the hypothesis that you looked at is listed next to their names?
Yes.
And as it related to hypothesis 1, that Leroy Fowler is included as a contributor, the statistical weight was that in favor of that hypothesis, that he was in fact a contributor, 23 septillion.
Yes.
And as it related to hypothesis 1, that Judy Church is included as a contributor, 2.3 octillion in favor of that.
Yes.
And again, as it related to Barbara Randall, under both hypotheses, she's actually excluded from the profile.
Yes.
I have no further questions for this witness.
Let's take the morning. We're ready whenever they are.
They're lining up.
Should I leave these so you can start throwing them at me if I get too carried away? Oh, is it? Okay. Bad idea.
Yeah.
All right, for the juice. Be seated. May I proceed, Your Honor?
Yes, you may, Mr. Nokonis.
Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning.
The DNA evolved as a biological science in terms of uniqueness of each individual, right? In other words, DNA deals with the original DNA aspect is something called the genome.
Genome? Yep.
Yep, and mispronunciation, but and there are certain loci on those, certain points on each of those in everybody's body, and those would be somewhat differently for every person, correct? Is a general concept.
Yes. Each person is unique with the exception of an identical twin.
Now, in this particular case, again, when you were asked to make, the determination, on the exterior of the bottle, I think you referenced it could have been as many as 5 profiles, or 5 persons referenced. You said definitely 3 to the exterior of the bottle, right? The mixture?
The mixture is of 3 individuals.
All right. And now, of those, you don't know when it got there, correct?
Correct.
Just because, my body doesn't tell you that, right? It doesn't know how it got there,
Correct.
and it doesn't know how long it's been there.
Correct.
Now, and when those types of issues happen, you move from the biology, basically, to a mathematical probability, right?
We do statistical calculations, yes.
Yeah. Because you can't determine how to take the biology of 3 people, but you know what's there, but you can apply the probabilities based upon the loci numbers that you have, right?
So we do a comparison between the profiles found on the evidence and a reference, and then we calculate a likelihood ratio statistic, and that gives the DNA profile as this many times more likely if it originated from person A than other random individuals.
So when you have 2 people or 1 person, you know definitely it's biology, it's pure. This is you, right? When it's more than that, then the probability aspect comes into it, which is the math application, right?
So there's always statistical calculations, even if the profile was just from a single person. When we do that comparison, we still would calculate a statistic as well.
That's the number in the gazillions, right? There's nobody else on the planet or in the universe that has that match, but you can never say absolutely positively because we've never done every person in the world, right?
That is true.
But when there's more than that, we're doing is mathematical formulas that you apply to see is it more likely and what is the percentage then, correct?
We're calculating a likelihood ratio, but we do a statistic and report it in our report.
And therefore, with the 3 people, you did that type of application, and when there's 2 people, even then, you have to do a somewhat similar application, right? It's only when it's single, you don't do, you know what it is, but then you figure out the probability that it's this person here versus anybody else in the world.
So even if it's a single source profile from one individual, we would still calculate the likelihood ratio and provide a statistic in our report to show that that DNA profile is X number of times more likely that it originated from that person versus another.
Again, because you can't, everybody in the world hasn't been tested, right?
Correct.
In the aspect of whether it's male or female, that's because the X's and the Y's change for the loci, right?
So there's a sex-determining region in our DNA, and a female has an XX and a male has an XY. So anytime we see an indication of that Y location, that tells us that there's male DNA present.
I don't have any further questions, Judge. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay.
Ms. Strauss.
I have no questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lundgren. You may step down.
Thank you.
John Haywood,